We've talked about the value chain along the wellhead to burner tip path a couple of times now. One of the things that we have to consider are the actual rates of service that the pipeline companies and storage owners charge for performing that service. And these are a function of the regulation of the respective industries, both crude oil and natural gas. So here we'll discuss the regulation, the transportation services, and rates of crude oil. The federal regulation of crude oil pipelines began with the Hepburn Act of 1906. They put the oil pipelines under the jurisdiction of the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887, which was established initially to regulate railroads. However, there was a concern that oil pipeline companies could have a monopoly similar to what the railroads had. And so they were designated as an interstate common carrier for all transportation of oil by pipeline. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 required that railroads and now crude oil pipelines file rates and charges that were reasonable and just with the federal government. They would also have to outline their terms of service, that is, the rules and regulations regarding the transportation of crude oil. They would have to show the form and content of their tariffs, tariffs being the rules of the game, so to speak, as well as the rates, the method of accounting, the type of reporting that they would do both to customers and the federal government, and then disclosure of shipper information. They were going to have to let everyone know who the shippers were on their pipelines. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, basically Congress in 1995 abolished the Interstate Commerce Commission. The entities subject to the ICC were now under FERC jurisdiction. They were still known as common carriers. The crude oil pipelines are not considered utilities. Natural gas pipeline companies were granted utility status under the Natural Gas Act of 1938. Therefore, crude oil pipeline companies have no guaranteed franchises, that is, no guaranteed market regions. They don't have the right of eminent domain. That basically means that they don't serve in the public interest. And so if they're in a dispute with a landowner over building pipeline, they have no fallback. They have to negotiate with the landowners to lease their surface rights to put the pipeline through there. However, they are required to file just and reasonable rates, and they have the same reporting requirements as natural gas pipeline companies. Here's a sample crude oil pipeline tariff that Shell Pipeline Company in Houston, Texas uses. You can see in the case of this pipeline, since it's entirely within the state of Texas, the Texas Railroad Commission has jurisdiction. You can see the type of pipeline is a petroleum product. Getting down to the rates there, the unit of measure is in cents per barrel. And at the very bottom, you can see that the rates in the first tier, which is set on volume, the rate is 16.4 cents per barrel. The more that you ship on Shell's pipeline, the cheaper the rate becomes. So anything above approximately 66,000 barrels, the rate reduces to 8.2 cents per barrel.